Good evening, directors, staff, and members of the public listening. I will now call this August 25th, 2020 Committee of the Whole meeting to order. Due to the current federal and state emergency declarations, the directive to residents to stay at home, and guidance about limiting person-to-person contact due to the COVID-19 pandemic, this meeting of the Minneapolis Board of Education is being conducted by electronic means in accordance with Minnesota Statute 13D.021. This meeting is being live streamed on YouTube and Channel 15, and a recording will be available on Channel 15 and on our website later. We're having some technical difficulties, so that's why it's being live streamed on YouTube. This meeting is discussion meeting, so no votes will be taken. Director Polly, will you please call the roll for the record?
Director Arneson.
Here.
Director Felder.
Here.
Director Ali.
Here.
Director Walzer.
Here.
Director Inns.
Here.
Director Jordan. Director Jordan. Director Caprini.
Present.
Director Polly is here. Chair Ellison.
Here.
Student Rep Janine.
Here.
Thank you. We have just one agenda item for presentation this evening. It's an update on planning for this school year. Directors, after the presentation, we'll take any clarifying questions. I will note for everyone that we plan to revisit how the first weeks have gone at our Committee of the Whole on September 22nd. For any clarifying questions, please plan to raise your hand to be recognized. Also remember to keep yourself on mute unless you are speaking to avoid background noise. Superintendent Graff and team, please go ahead with the presentation.
Thank you, Chair Ellison, Board Directors, Student Rep Janine, members of the public listening this evening, thank you and good evening. Tonight, we're going to provide you with updates on our back to school planning, and we'll use our same format that we presented on August 4th. And in some cases, we actually may share a repeat of information that was given at that meeting. Our goal really is to make sure that our families, staff, and students are hearing useful information repeatedly so that their anxiety about this year's very different start to the school year can be lessened. Before I launch into the slides, however, I feel that I once again must acknowledge what's happening here and nationally that continues to contribute to heightened trauma in the communities we serve, especially our African American community. Over the last few days, we've watched an endless loop of news footage from Kenosha, Wisconsin, showing Mr. Jacob Blake being shot multiple times in the back by local officers. And while there's certainly a benefit in broadly highlighting the heinous nature of what's occurring, even after the killing of George Floyd here in Minneapolis, I cannot imagine what it must trigger for African Americans, especially Black men, to have to relive that image over and over. And it's this constant triggering of anger and fear that many of our young Black men bring with them to school. And later in this presentation, you'll hear just a small sample of how we're adapting our professional development and even our school schedules to allow space for them and all of our students to give voice to how this is affecting them. Likewise, our own Northside community has sustained yet another loss overnight of a 15-year-old young woman who was shot and killed near James and 23rd. This ongoing violence in our community is taking a devastating toll on our future because these young people are significantly contributing to our future, and schools are one piece of the puzzle. And we all know we can, even in the midst of this pandemic, we will do all we can, even in the midst of this pandemic, to help our youth feel respected, valued, and cared for. But it's becoming more and more apparent that we cannot do it all. And we support a broad spectrum of community interventions to end this cycle of violence and trauma that impacts so many of our students. As I said, we know that COVID-19 has disrupted many rituals and routines for our students. And tonight, we'll again share our plan to mitigate that loss in as safe and manageable way as we can. So earlier this month, I shared with you our approach to educating MPS students as the pandemic continues. And rather than come up with a static plan, we introduced this framework or continuum we call the MPS 5 Phases to Safe Learning. The continuum puts systems in place that will allow us to tighten up our protocols even more, much like we did from March through July. Or we can gradually change those protocols to take us safely back to full in-person learning. Our plan is to monitor conditions and data every 2 weeks. Our main aim is to identify reliable points in the school year calendar where the district will possibly move between different learning models. These dates will likely coincide with the mid-quarter and quarter marks throughout the year. Well, we're certainly hopeful to move to learning models that are less restrictive. It's possible that we will have to move from less restrictive to more restrictive models based on worsening COVID health metrics or other factors. As we review criteria to determine whether we can turn the dial, we will be consulting with an advisory council consisting of bargaining units, staff, students, and families. Then, of course, the recommendation will be brought to the board for additional discussion before being reported to MDE before implementation. I've talked multiple times about moving from emergency learning in the spring to truly planful and intentional virtual learning this fall, as that's been our top priority. We know we can alleviate a lot of stress for parents, caregivers, and students if we prioritize their learning with a student-centered design. And I want to share with you an excerpt from an article that was recently noted in Edutopia, which states, in a traditional face-to-face classroom, everything is centralized and consistent. Bins and areas of the room are clearly labeled, routines are created, key information is prominently posted. Classrooms don't change location, and learners don't have to guess where they're going or where to find things. The same should be true online. The article went on to say that what we as educators know to be true, students excel when they have clear expectations, consistency, and the comfort of rituals and routines. We also know that wraparound supports, opportunities to get academic help, or to speak to a professional when sick or stressed are important. All of that has been considered and is attempted to be incorporated into our phase 2 distance learning plan. We've talked a lot about how we'll have in-school supports for students. In fact, the vast majority of partners who typically work in school buildings during a traditional school year will continue to work with students this fall, but it will be done in a virtual capacity. And in cases when needed, a few critical partners will be able to provide targeted in-person support if it's determined that that's appropriate, then by referral and by appointment. There are also internal departments and reassigned staff who will reach even more students, possibly more than community partners will reach. They already have access to MPS systems, Google Classrooms, so they can more quickly and easily work with students than partners can. This next slide offers a few examples of what I mean. We're obviously much closer this fall to ensuring that every student will have access to technology, the internet, and more help effectively using both. And we know that we don't have control over the supply chain, but we do have a plan in place, and we built in a school-based mechanism rather than central office-driven mechanism to check which students still have technology access needs or who may need a device repaired or a hotspot before school begins, rather than while distance learning is in full swing. We also know our teachers will have more experience with distance learning and will benefit from additional professional development, standards for teaching, and guidance on best practices. Students can expect to have more regular instruction with teachers, And our goal is to help teaching staff provide more live classroom experiences where students can learn together. So everyone's better connected and less isolated. And of course, students who have special needs, perhaps related to special education, language, or academics, will get individual support or interventions that they require for success. And because we realize learning at home isn't easy for everyone, we're going to make more mental and emotional health supports accessible to those who need them. So what we've done is made distance learning more robust, more intentional and deliberate, as these are the things that our families and staff have told us they need to be successful in distance learning. We also know that equity in our approach is critical. And so here's what that looks like. We're going school by school to identify what academic supports they have in place, especially for those students who may have been experiencing learning loss. We're examining our external partnerships where they are available to support learning and where there are none exist. And where we have those gaps, our associate superintendents are going to be working directly with the school leadership teams, which are rooted in our commitment to multi-tiered systems of support, just like they would do during the school year, ensuring that students don't slip through the cracks without getting the supports they need. We'll also have a focus on asset-driven strategies, where every school will have an opening circle to provide opportunity for students and teachers to develop and strengthen relationships. All of our middle schools will have advisories to support student voice and relationship development. And then we'll have, schools will have access to professional development to support and emphasize morning meetings and advisory work for teachers, and also additional ways of understanding how to engage students in the context of COVID-19 and of course with the killing and murder of George Floyd. So we believe it's important each day to begin at the elementary level with an emphasis on building community and providing opportunity for students to express their voices. And we'll have members of our equity, social emotional learning, and positive school-wide engagement department teams available to support schools as needed. And we'll also be providing additional materials to support those opening circles and advisories. Finally, around the area of communication with families, we will be improving our communication with families and honoring the variety of ways that our families have indicated they would like information. Specifically, we've added an emphasis on videos directly addressing parent recommendations, what families and students can expect with distance learning, focus on language and cultural awareness of the families receiving this information, so that, again, they're getting updated information in a context that is very specific to what their needs are, and also provides access on an ongoing basis with the weekly updates. So with that as the overview for tonight, I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Fearing, and we'll ask her to provide an update on academics.
Hi, good evening, Chair Ellison, Board Director, Superintendent Graff. Can you go to the next slide? Thanks. Here are a few academic updates from the last board meeting about distance learning. First, I need to take a few moments to thank the volunteers, community organizations, the Minneapolis Federation of Teachers, MPS staff, who all helped during our back to school supply donation drives. We were able to send approximately 8,500 backpacks filled with school supplies and kits out to schools for our students and families who need them for distance learning. We can always use more supplies, so please let us know if you'd like to donate new school supplies such as folders, notebooks, and headphones. Our next school supply donation drive is this Thursday, coming up August 27th. It'll be at the Davis Center from 9 to 2. We also kicked off last week with professional development for our building administrators. We started with equity and launched curriculum transformation that you heard about last week as part of the high expectations for teaching and learning in the climate framework. We also provided professional development on distance learning, as well as specific academic content to prepare them for new content and software as we move forward in distance learning. Starting August 21st, teachers have had access to an internal distance learning website, as well as professional development information. We're excited to be able to provide 3 different ways for teachers to access professional development. First, teachers will be able to access much of the professional development anytime through our created videos located on the source. Additionally, teachers will be offered live time professional development if they would rather learn that way. And lastly, any of the live time sessions will be recorded so teachers can view them afterwards as review or for those who were engaging in other PD during the live session. In this way, we'll be providing flexible and adaptive professional development opportunities for our teachers. They will also have time to engage in equity and curriculum transformation during the first few days in September. At the last meeting, you heard about the climate framework from Senior Officer Moore. So I'd like to turn it over to him, who will now present on the intersection and future work of curriculum transformation and the climate framework.
Thank you, Senior Officer Fearing. It's my pleasure to have the opportunity to look at the relationship between the climate framework and the curriculum transformation work that we're embarking on. And the important piece that we're attempting to do is move from theory to action. So as stated last week, we will begin with our belief statements that are co-constructed with members of our community, our school community, as well as our larger community in families and students. We'll take those belief statements and values and we move that into professional development on self-awareness. And so we're focusing on a set of equity competencies. It's really important that as we look at the work that we do, particularly in teaching, that we really examine who we are and how that impacts moving over to the transforming learning, how and what we teach. And so that's the curriculum transformation work that we're looking at. We're attempting to look at how do we take a look at our practices, our white middle class normative practices that in many cases allow access to power, and in some cases deny the experiences of our students of color, and moving really explicitly from accessing, supporting students and accessing their background knowledge to critically examine if the way I'm teaching and what I'm teaching is that oppressing or silencing the voices of some and or privileging others. And so we want to re-examine our work. We want to look at the oppression of exclusion in the curriculum. As we move into the culturally sustaining pedagogy from how and what we teach, we start understanding that how and what we teach operates in the space of white normative ideology, the ways of knowing and doing. Perhaps that's not the only way to educate our children. In some cases, perhaps that's causing our students to not be their best selves. But we move to a space of questioning power, so supporting our students in questioning power, co-creating, a space of co-creation with our students and our families, obviously identifying, prioritizing best practices, and then restoring narratives. So there's narratives, and I shared last week around John Lewis. That's a narrative that I'd never had the opportunity to learn about. I learned about Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, but there's a number of narratives that our students of color, our Black, brown, and white children, our Asian and Indian students do not have access to. And so we're really restoring narratives of excellence and greatness for our students. As we do this work together, what we expect to see is greater levels of teacher satisfaction. We expect that our relationships between our teachers and our students and our community become stronger. We also will see more engaged students because we're valuing who our students are. Our students are not having to leave aspects of their identity at the door in order to be successful. And then we'll ultimately have move from there to any outcome that we can identify, be it grades, graduation rates, participation in advanced courses, test scores. But simply if students feel heard, seen, valued, our teachers feel heard, seen, valued, and they are forming strong relationships with our students in our community, then we'll get the outcomes that we're searching for. But it certainly begins with our values, then examination of self and the types of biases we have, then how and what we teach, then we'll change the way we teach, and then we'll move to some positive outcomes. So that's the vision of the curriculum transformation work, and really excited to partner with the academic division in doing this work.
Thanks, Senior Officer Moore. I know that the Special Education Department is very honored to partner in the work with both the academic team as well as your team. So I'd like to just take a moment to say good evening to our board directors and Superintendent Graff, and to give you just a few updates about special education. We have had an engaging last 2 weeks. We've been meeting with families and with staff as people are preparing for the new school year ahead. And I will be honest with you, there's many concerns, there's a little anxiety, but also mixed with that, we heard a lot of hope and optimism for this new school year. Last Thursday, we met with over 100 families online to hear what worked for them in the spring, what didn't work for them, and answer many questions that they had. We know that for our families of students receiving special education services, that they had a heavier lift in facilitating instruction for their students. We also met with staff last night and had over 100 staff meet with us online just to talk about preparing for the new school year, new technologies, new resources we have for them, and to answer some questions about our famous due process paperwork and other questions they had at that time. We also recently just sent a letter to our families, also explaining kind of the educational plan for fall and making sure that they had an understanding. We will also be recording a video for our families regarding special education this Friday, so we're looking forward to that release. We're currently in the process of redesigning our websites for both families and staff, making sure that everything's updated, easy to find, and is connected with many of the distance learning resources in our website and on our front page. We've been increasing the professional development options for our special education services for our teachers as they come back. They'll have some that are in live mode, some that will be able to be on demand. And also I'm really excited about the fact that over the next 3 days, we'll have staff that will be manning Google Hangouts where our teachers can come and go, ask questions, get ideas, talk to other teachers and to our department staff about things that they need as they come back to start this school year. We're increasing our technology solutions for adaptations and interventions and getting those all in place and making sure that our staff understand how to use them and are able to use them for solutions to increase the engagement of our students receiving special education services. We're following national and state guidance on procedures and delivery of service for students with IFSPs, individual family service plans, and individual education plans. All of our families will be contacted by their case manager to review their IEP before school starts. That IEP will be reviewed to add services that show distance learning. It's not to take away any service, and those in-person services will be in place on that IEP as well. But we also want to add the distance learning additions that will be needed for their student to be successful on a virtual platform. As that goes, that way then we won't have to be having multiple IEP meetings through the year as we move from back and forth, possibly between a hybrid model, distance learning, and in-person. And of course, we're looking ahead to phase 3. We're already looking at what targeted supports might be for our families with special education students moving forward. So looking forward to that work and partnering with other departments as we think about that. So I also want to have an opportunity to talk to you a little bit about phase 2 and updates on additional supports for our students and families. So let's first talk about mental health supports. So our school support staff have been very busy attending professional development on healing-centered engagement. We talked a little bit about this back in June and July, that was something we were going to focus on. And we've been able to provide that professional development to our principals and are looking forward to having on-demand and in-person sessions on that for our teachers and other support staff as we move forward. We met together on Friday for a training on anti-racist mental health teams. And that was a multidisciplinary team, including our school social workers, our school counselors, our school-based mental health partners, our licensed school nurses, and our school counselors. So very excited about that. They spend a lot of time talking about how they were going to begin the year, what type of support that we think our students will need as they enter into this new school year. We have an expectation that all of our teams will be meeting together at each school site in their school-based mental health team throughout the year. This will really help us with referrals and moving through that process and making sure that none of our students fall between the cracks. We'll also be continuing to connect our families to school-based mental health services, and that will be through both our school staff as well as our school-based mental health partners. And our counseling team has worked all summer on developing lessons for students to enhance their mental health well-being, as well as understanding their own identity as they enter into the space of our new school year. Our school-based mental health agency partners will continue to provide telehealth services to students that are on their caseloads and any new referrals that they get. They will also be invited back to buildings to provide in-person supports during this phase too. And I'm working with each of them individually, each of the partner agencies individually on a health plan. So we make sure that they have what they need to enter into our buildings in a safe and healthy manner. Our school-based mental health agency partners are available at 52 of our schools and will continue to expand to other sites throughout the year. I'd now like to turn it over to Charlotte Kinsley, our Manager of Homeless and Highly Mobile Supports.
Thanks, Rochelle. Good evening, Chair Ellison, board directors, and Superintendent Graff. I appreciate just having a few minutes to share with you about our support of students experiencing homelessness. And I'll start with just this chart here showing you what we saw last year in terms of our numbers of students experiencing homelessness. Before COVID, we were trending slightly higher in our numbers, but we identified half as many students between March and July of this year as we had the previous school year, which is related to the challenges of identifying students during distance learning. So we ended the year slightly lower than our previous year. We identified a higher number of students in self-pay motels and a lower number of students in shelters. We continue to see the disproportionality in who experiences homelessness, with our Black, Brown, and Indigenous students overrepresented, which is of course a direct result of our deep history of racist housing and land use practices. Some of our school sites hit between 50 to 60% of their student body having experienced homelessness at some point during their time at MPS, which really demonstrates the urgent need for affordable housing options in our community and special attention to the strengths and needs of these students and their school communities. Next slide, thanks. So our goal is really to support housing stability and access to shelter and resources wherever possible, while we are identifying and prioritizing students who need additional support during distance learning. And that really starts with identification. So as I mentioned, it's particularly challenging during distance learning. We identify families pretty quickly and easily when they're in shelter, but we're seeing those numbers in shelter much lower than we typically see. So family shelters are at about 50% of where they were last year at this time. And so we don't have the transportation request to sort of spark a conversation about an address change with school staff. So we've done training with principals and social workers who will take the lead in ensuring that school staff know what to watch for and listen for in identifying students who may be experiencing instability, and to know what to do with that information to make sure that the family and the student receives the support they need from school and stays connected. The encampments are fluid and changing regularly. We're staying connected and updated as much as possible, and we're prepared to respond whenever we learn of an MPS student living in an encampment. So far, we've had a few students and we've been able to support some of them moving from encampments into shelter. We're going to continue to offer support that's responsive to families' needs. And we've let folks on the ground know how to contact us moving forward. Another important role that we play is resource sharing, which is really becoming increasingly important as we know that many families are behind in their rent. And when that eviction moratorium gets lifted, there's real concern that many families and students will be pushed into homelessness. So we have some direct resources, including Stable Homes, Stable Schools, and some eviction prevention funds through the National Council of Jewish Women. But we do a lot of connecting to resources. So we're keeping social workers informed of those supports. So legal eviction protections, eviction prevention resources, shelter availability, and other community resources, so they can help support students and parents in accessing that support. We've purchased additional supplies, extra headphones for families who may have them break or lose them. And we also have supply money available to be responsive to the needs as they arise, specific to our students experiencing homelessness. Lunch deliveries is another important resource for any of our families who lack transportation or have a medical need that keeps them from getting to a site for pickup. Regular communication with our partners has been and will continue to be critical to supporting our students. Both People Serving People and Mary's Place, which are our largest family shelters, are deploying their youth staff and volunteers to support distance learning. We're partnering with them to make sure they have the information they need to support MPS students. And we will continue to share updates with our partners regularly so they can also help keep families informed as well. And then really just a need to prioritize students who need additional support. So we'll be tracking engagement and attendance to help schools quickly respond with additional support. And then as we move into hybrid options, prioritizing HHM students who are struggling to engage with the option to return to in-person learning. Just Stable Homes, Stable Schools. So that's an initiative that started at 15 of our elementary schools. We've completed our first full school year and had some great results that I wanted to share. So you can see the numbers on here, but since the last report, we've actually served even more families with an expansion over the summer. We've now spent over $300,000 in direct eviction prevention support, serving over 700 MPS students so they could remain in their home. And we now have 68 families who are housed, including 233 children. We've seen really strong results around the school stability and attendance outcomes. School stability, for example, our students that were enrolled in the program had a 90% school stability rate compared with the district average of 86%. And for comparison, our HHM students had a school stability rate of 65%. And also saw really promising outcomes around attendance for this group of students. Looking forward, in March, Hennepin County applied in partnership with Stable Homes, Stable Schools for Homework Starts with Home, a state grant, and we were one of 4 programs that received funding. So we were approved for $800,000 over the next 3 years, which included an expansion to 3 additional sites, Falwell, Webster, and Whittier. We were able to hire a dedicated MPS coordinator and received funding for the Parent Advisory Council. Another thing we'll be looking at is planning for the comprehensive district design changes, which includes supporting transition options for families who are already housed, whether that be a school or a housing transition, and using the new CDD zones now for next year so that families don't, those who are in housing search now, using those zones so they don't experience a school move next year. Anderson will be the only site to leave the initiative since it will no longer be an elementary school. So with that, I will pass it over to Senior Officer Hennis.
Thank you, Charlotte. Good evening, Chair Ellison, Superintendent Graff, Board Directors. My name is Justin Hennis. I'm the Senior Information Officer. I'll be providing a brief update on technology and device distribution. Device distribution will be taking place at each of our schools. The schools have been encouraged to distribute devices at back-to-school events when possible. These events will be taking place at our schools this week and next week. And as you may be aware, there's a worldwide device shortage. We've been working with our schools and they've been reaching out to each of our students and families to identify those that do not have access to technology that they can use for distance learning. Although we've had device orders delayed, We have enough devices to cover the students that we need one based on the request we have received from our schools. That concludes the technology update, and Senior Officer DeVette is up next.
Thank you, Senior Officer Hennis. Good evening, Chair Ellison, Superintendent Graff, members of the board. Just a couple of quick updates from operationalizing our distance learning, starting with our meal distribution update. And I feel I would be remiss to talk about meal distribution without again adding a shout out to our culinary services and all of our team members who worked tirelessly since we had the emergency closing in March to provide emergency food services for the tens of thousands of families that we serve. So thank you to every member of our food service team and other staff who helped support what by all accounts was a hugely successful meal service program over the summer. We will be resuming meal services with the start of school on September 8th, and meal services will remain available throughout all of the phases to safe learning. We're currently working to finalize the information, which will be posted on our Culinary and Wellness Services website. That is the best place to access for the most current information. There is some changes under the USDA funding as we move into fall. The meal service will be provided under the National School Lunch Program. So some of the USDA waivers that Minnesota applied for that allowed us to do our broad distribution during the summer now shift to being done under the National School Lunch Program. So one of the main changes is food is available aligned with the instructional days in the week. So we will continue to do food boxes that have multiple days. So for instance, if it is a full week of instruction, i.e. we have 5 instructional days in the calendar week, there will be 5 days worth of meals in that box, which means that a family or student needs to do the pickup again, just once per week, similar to what happened during the summer. Those meal boxes will consist of both breakfast and lunch. What we're identified is 30 sites throughout MPS where any family or student can pick up their meal boxes. They do not need to go to the school of enrollment to pick up their meal service boxes. Additionally, we are working through some access information around meal cards, but I do want to stress that as long as the family or student picking up the meal box has their student ID and the student name, they will be able to pick up a meal box. And then we will be doing additional supper programming once we have the appropriate guidance and we built the capacity to deliver that program at our community eligible sites. So again, I encourage people to continue to visit the Culinary Wellness Services website for the most up-to-date information. Some of the information was in process of being posted today, and there will be a map of the pickup sites that are available and the schedule for that. My second area of update is around school-age childcare, and we will continue to provide school-age care for our Tier 1 critical workers as we have since the emergency order was enacted. Most of the information that you see on the slide is a repeat of what we've shared all along. I did want to spend just a minute talking about the Tier 1 critical workers and where the child care sites will be. So we did make the decision to use 7 of our middle school sites for childcare beginning on September 8th. And this was in order to work to retain capacity, particularly in our elementary school, for a potential or planned return to in-person learning via a hybrid model, particularly for our lower grades. So this childcare will start September 8th with Tier 1 critical workers as defined in the governor's order. Now, the Tier 1 critical workers basically applies to families who are enrolled in MPS who are working in healthcare or emergency response. It has been expanded to include educators who are providing in-person instruction. So at this point, that does not include MPS staff who is involved in distance learning beyond those staff involved in childcare and food services. As we understand our capacity and our resources moving forward, we'll continue to look at whether or not we can open up childcare opportunities to a broader group of people. We currently believe we have the resources to accommodate about 525 children. Registration opened on August 19th, and I would want to share that we are currently oversubscribed in some of those sites. So the Minneapolis Kids staff is working through with those parents and identifying where they can be placed within our existing childcare capacity. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Dr. Harris Berry to provide an update on athletics.
You for the opportunity to update you on the Minnesota State High School League athletic guidelines. The Minnesota High School League has identified cross country, soccer, swimming and diving, and girls tennis as the 2021 in-season fall sports, which began Monday, August 17th. These in-season sports teams are allowed to engage in both practices and competitions. To mitigate COVID-19 exposure, spectators would not be allowed to attend any competitions. I am excited to report that football and volleyball has been pushed back to the spring of 2021. The Minnesota High School League has identified football, volleyball, badminton, baseball, golf, lacrosse, softball, boys tennis, and track and field as off-season fall sports, allowing these sports teams to engage in 12 practices, contact days, without competitions beginning September 14th and through October 3rd. Finally, the Minnesota High School League is currently reviewing a start date for adaptive soccer. Detailed information regarding these updates and the 5-stage athletic approach can be found in MPS COVID-19 Athletic Fall Preparedness Plan. The link is available at the bottom of this slide. Now I will turn over the presentation to Executive Officer Kelly.
Good evening, Chair Ellison, Superintendent Graff, and board members. We understand there has been some ambiguity about how community partners can work with students in phase 2. So hopefully this information provided this evening will be able to give you some clarity. As with everything we're doing in phase 2, in an effort to better prioritize student and staff safety as we begin the school year, the list of partners who will be able to provide in-person supports to students has been restricted. These are limited to in-person physical and mental health services to begin the school year. That said, MPS has a broad range of community-based partners who have stepped up and said they are willing to offer or to work with us virtually until we can move the dial forward. Some will be working after school, and some, who often partner with teachers in the classroom, will continue to offer virtual supports during the school day. Some examples of these partners include Project Success, Spark Y, Minnesota Youth Story Squad, Making Proud Choices, partners Lutheran Social Services, North Point, Planned Parenthood, Fairview Youth Grief Services, Park Nicollet Growing Through Grief, and YWCA Contact Plus. A very small number of partners who had previously worked out legal agreements will be able to work with students one-to-one, and again, that is virtually, to provide targeted intensive support services. Some examples of these partners include Beacons, College Access Network, Tier 3 partners, which are TRIO, Upward Bound, and College Possible, and Reading and Math Corps. In addition, there are many community-based organizations such as Hennepin County Library, Minneapolis Park and Rec Board, Boys and Girls Clubs, and etc., who are offering childcare, enrichment programs, homework help, learning pods, and more this fall. While MPS students may participate in these programs, the program is not offered in collaboration with the district. Our role is simply to share these resources with families, and then families can sign up directly with the organization if they so choose. We have adapted the Carry Home Flyer program, and as you know, we distribute flyers in our schools, but they must go through a central process before they are distributed. So we've adapted that program to allow information to be distributed electronically this year, which had not been done in the past. Organizations can be directed to a link on our website for more information. And then resources will be posted on the distance learning webpage, which goes live next week. And it will also be shared with family liaisons for inclusion in their school communication to families. I know this is a lot of information very quickly, but if anyone has questions about partnerships in MPS or at a particular school, I would encourage them to reach out to Michelle Kellogg, and her email address can be found on our website. With that, I will turn over to Senior Officer Ibrahim Ajab to talk about financial considerations. Thank you.
Senior Officer Diop, we can't hear you.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry for that. Chair Ellison, Superintendent Graff, members of the board, and community members who are listening. I'll go through these 3 slides to highlight the federal and or state funding that we're receiving to support us during these COVID-19 times. I'll start with the CRF, which stands for Coronavirus Relief Funds. And for those, for that funding, we're slated to receive $10,926,394. And right in that slide, you can see that 60% of that funding can be used for operating costs, 40% for student, family, and staff support costs. And it shows the duration of these funds, which started on 7/1 or July 1, 2020, and will go until December 31st, 2020. So those are for about 6 months. Then after that, we have the GEAR funding, GEAR standing for Governor's Emergency Education Relief Funds. And that is the amount for the GEAR fund is $1,464,203. And the use of these funds can be expanded to technology. It can be used to expand our technology capacity, improve summer school programming. And the duration for this fund is from March 13th, 2020, this past March, to September 30th, 2022. The third and final set of funds for COVID-19 would be the ESSA, or Elementary and Secondary School Education Relief Funds. And the amount of the ESSA funds is $18,705,817. The use of these funds, we can use these funds to supplement the GEAR funds that I mentioned earlier for summer school programming. We can use these funds to support mental health. And we can also use these funds to meet the needs of historically underserved populations. The duration for the ESSA funds is March 13th, 2020 to September 30th, 2022. With that, I'll have my colleague, Associate Superintendent Rochelle Cox, take it from there to cover the health and safety protocols.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk to you a little bit about our health and safety protocols in phase 2. While we know in phase 2, we don't have a lot of students on site, we still have students who are part of childcare, as well as staff and community partners that are in our sites. Are at our sites. So every one of our sites will have a COVID-19 site program coordinator. In most cases, this will be the school principal or the department head. The responsibilities of our program coordinators is to educate and remind our staff, students, and families about the signs of illness and to stay home if they are presenting with any symptoms. They're to ensure that our COVID-19 prevention practices are being followed. Those are such things as using face coverings, our practices around social distancing, our hand washing routines, and our protective personal equipment usage. Our COVID-19 program coordinators are also going to be very diligent about our staff taking attendance daily, and that's for both our staff, our students, and our community providers. We will need them to sign in and out of the building every day. We'll also be creating isolation spaces for any students who become ill during the day. And we're wanting to make sure that our program coordinators are ensuring there's good communication between the health office and our central office regarding any concerns of exposure or positive cases. We also want to make sure that they are developing transportation plans for any ill students or staff members who might need to go home or to medical care. And finally, it's imperative that this program coordinator role really ensures that confidentiality is of utmost importance and that we're not sharing any information unless absolutely necessary. I want to talk a little bit about when we have a confirmed positive case, what that communication looks like. We've identified our communication to be in two different categories. One is a high-risk notification and one is a low-risk notification. We do these notifications based on information that we've received from the person who has the confirmed positive case and also in consultation with the Minnesota Department of Health and our MPS Health Services Department. So anyone who is determined to be a close contact receives a high-risk notification from either the Department of Health or the Minneapolis Health Services Department. And that contact is a direct contact. It is a phone call just to make sure that we can answer any questions that person might have. Current guidance is that if a person is of high risk exposure, that they are able to quarantine for 14 days to monitor for symptoms, even if they have a negative test result. We know that many people, if we're doing our social distancing, we're wearing our face coverings, are going to be more in the area of a low risk notification. At that point, an associate superintendent would send a notification to principals to share with the employee or families at the impacted site as a reminder to continue with the preventative measures and to monitor for signs of illness. Low risk means that the risk of exposure is no greater than the risk of contracting the virus in our general community. So I just want to go through a few things that we're really concentrating on to mitigate the risk of exposure to the virus. One is about social distancing. So when we talk about social distancing, we're really telling people that are in our buildings that they must keep space between themselves and other. It's really our most critical role for decreasing the spread of COVID-19. That important number to remember is 6 feet. And if staff are unable to maintain 6 feet, which we imagine might happen when we get more and more students into the building who might need personal care or behavioral support, then students should reduce that amount of time of contact to less than 15 minutes or start to add some additional personal protective equipment that will be provided for them. We are currently increasing and monitoring our inventory control of personal protective equipment. And a big shout out to our environmental services department who's really taking this on. We want to make sure that all of our staff and students have access to face coverings and are wearing them when they're in our school buildings. There are some exceptions to this. Children under 5, those with medical conditions, those with special education needs, or those who could not take off their face covering by themselves. We also will be providing additional personal protective equipment, such as gloves, gowns, and face shields for those staff who are unable to social distance with students and for our health services staff. Our COVID-19 coordinators will also be monitoring the inventory of PPE at their sites and ensuring that items are reordered and restocked. Shipments are arriving already at our schools for these PPE. I also want to just let you know that we know that training is going to be very important. And so we have created a training series on planning for a safe return to work and school. We have 2 courses that's made up of right now: COVID-19 health and safety protocols and COVID-19 cleaning and disinfecting surfaces. This is available to all our staff and is required for staff returning to work on site. It's also available to non-MPS staff members through our community learning portal. All right, and now I'm going to turn it over to Senior Officer Sullivan for a Human Resources update.
Thank you, Associate Cox. Good evening, Chair Ellison, Superintendent, members of the board. I'm going to share with you a few HR updates as we approach phase 2. First, we're modifying hiring for the start of the school year. So to protect the employment stability of our current staff during this unprecedented time, we're holding on hiring for specific positions while we're in phase 2 of distance learning with supports. This includes our bus drivers, food service, and specific ESP vacancies. This hiring modification will change throughout the school year as we move through different phases, as we know our staffing needs vary dramatically by phase. For all other positions, we're continuing to hire and hire virtually. After employees complete their onboarding process with us, new staff are participating in our 2-day new employee orientation, but this time in a virtual environment. We're also having a new teacher orientation. This year's held last week. We have an in-person component for staff to pick up their laptops, and the rest was held virtually. So we know it's a challenging time, but we are excited to welcome our new teachers and new staff to the MPS community. Secondly, wanted to provide an update about returning to work. So in order to best meet the needs of our students, families, and staff, specific roles are expected to return to work in person. These roles currently include principals and assistant principals, school secretaries, custodians, food service, transportation, Minneapolis Kids, student placement, grounds and trucking, our IT field techs, and teen parenting services. This will change as we go through the different phases or as our needs of students and families change, and we'll continue to monitor this to determine modifications. As we have staff to return in person, we are doing our best to support staff that need either accommodations or leaves. And there are 2 key provisions that are guiding this. First is the Governor's Executive Order 2082, which states that schools must provide accommodation to staff and allow for staff whose health is at risk or who have members of their households who's at risk to work from home to the extent possible, as well as the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which provides employees with paid sick leave or expanded FMLA for specific reasons related to COVID, which could include quarantine or caring for somebody who's subject to quarantine or for childcare. Again, throughout this time, we're doing our best to serve our students and families while keeping our staff safe. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Zambrino, who is going to share what families and staff can expect for the next few weeks.
Hey, good evening. This is Associate Ray. Good evening once again, Superintendent Graff, Chair Ellison, and members of the board. Tonight, I'm going to talk about what families can expect, families, staff, and students can expect the next few weeks. First, families and students, the week of August 24th. Weekly MPS email update and resource videos. They also could be found on our Back to School 2020 web pages. School staff continues updating students' family contact information and device needs. School staff on duty to take phone calls from families. Again, that's important. There'll be in-person people, a person there to take phone calls. Student placement in-person services continue. Site-based back-to-school activities, events begin. Device returns and pickups. Complete registration forms, including educational benefits, which is extremely important to our schools. School supply distribution. And for our staff, MPS Insider Newsletter, ongoing meetings and communication with various bargaining groups, distance learning and curriculum transformation PD for school-based staff. Next, moving to the week of August 31st. Some of this was repeat, but some of it is new information based from August 24th. Weekly MPS email update and resource videos. School staff continues to confirm student family contact information and device needs. School staff on duty to take phone calls from families once again. There'll be in-person student placement services that'll continue. Teachers and school staff begin communication to families regarding daily schedules, distance learning plans, ways to stay connected, and school-specific academic supports. For staff, ongoing meetings and communication with various bargaining groups and SEL Equity PD. Those are what our stakeholders can expect over the next few weeks. I'm gonna turn it over to Superintendent Graf.
Thank you, Associate Ray. Chair Ellison, just again, appreciate the opportunity to provide an update as to what we're doing to support phase 2 of our distance learning and a safe return to schools. Again, a reminder that we do have schools beginning on September 8th for our 1st through 12th grade students, and on September 10th for pre-K and kindergarten students. So at this time, we're available to respond to any questions that board members might have based on the presentation here. I will also note that we do have items located in the appendix or additional information that was presented at our last committee of the whole meeting. And again, we just wanted to highlight some of the significant changes that we've had since the last conversation, but certainly available to answer any questions for more detail or follow-up if we're not able to provide responses this evening.
Thank you. Directors, remember these are clarifying questions. I'm going to start with Director Felder.
Thank you, Chair Ellison. I'm just going to work backwards a little bit. Do we have anything out there to check the mental health of our teachers going forward, especially those who are going to be in buildings teaching? Is there time for them to take breaks and have someone come in? I just have noticed from people who work in the public what a toll it takes on their mental health. Just knowing that they're out there like that. So I was just wondering if there was anything set up for our teachers and other faculty members.
Thanks for the question, Director Felder. I appreciate your acknowledgement of just how stressful this is for everyone, employees who are working now, employees who are going to be, our teachers did start back today as well, so an acknowledgement of that. But the need for support there, we do have obviously a program supporting teachers and educators if they have needs for mental health support. But as far as what does that look like, I'll defer to Associate Cox to provide kind of a little bit more information about, in addition to what we already have for our employee assistance program, if there are needs for employees to go that route, but also just reference the mental health support that we're going to be providing through some of the PD training. Associate Cox, can you add some more information there, please?
Yeah, I sure can. Thank you, Director Felder. So we've been talking a lot about this, and we have many of our school support staff, such as our school social workers, our school counselors, our school psychologists, who are trained to provide that psychological first aid. And I think it will be important that we set up a community in our schools in where we're checking in on each other and then we're reaching out to each other, giving each other time to reflect. I always like to call it like that time to kind of, when your sponge is really full, to kind of squeeze the water out and squeeze it out so that you're ready to move on to the next day, to the next professional development that you're doing. So we've been talking to our related staff about really kind of watching out for each other and being that person in the building who's looking out for the well-being of each other. I think the other piece is that our school-based mental health partners can also play a role in this. You know, we've I think when we first started the school-based mental health program, we really said, wow, this is only for our students, just because of, you know, there's always such a great need for the service. But I think they also will be in partnership with us to help families and also to watch and to be kind of that barometer to see how things are going in the building. Also, our school principals can reach out to us in the special education department and our division at any time with any needs that we can help with.
Okay, good. I was just wondering, just because, you know, there's no cure yet. It is a pandemic and our numbers are rising. Do we have anything for the numbers when they start to get a little bit higher? Are we watching that curve to see when we need to pull back even our principals and other people in the office and go to just the minimum?
Director Felder, thank you for the question. As we kind of signaled tonight, we do have a process we are going through and monitoring, and we're really looking at first of all, the guidance that the state put out, the Minnesota Department of Health, around looking at the number of cases and the numbers in relation to every 10,000 for Hennepin County. We're also constantly monitoring what we have in Minneapolis public schools, as we have staff working right now and have incidents or situations that arise related to COVID-19 cases. So a combination of those kind of identifiers are things that we're reviewing. And if it gets to a point where we have to move into a more restrictive environment, we would be consulting very directly with the Minnesota Department of Health and would certainly be notifying the board. But the practice has been in many cases when that happens that it's very site-based specific. So we do use our current structure of meetings that we have every day with our health and safety team to evaluate and update on the status of things related to number of cases and the rates that we have in Hennepin County.
Okay, great. Thank you. And just, I was wondering, the everyday PPE, does that include Lysol and disinfectants and hand sanitizer?
Director Felder, regarding the personal protective equipment, we have personal protective equipment, and then we also have cleaning supplies. So definite distinction between those two items. And I don't have the specific brands, but do know that they meet the requirements of you know, our guidelines related to I can't think of the manual off the top of my head, but we have a certain manual that we have to use in terms of what's safe in schools and what's permitted in schools. So those cleaning supplies are aligned to what the requirements are from MDH and the health guidelines.
Okay, thank you. And about the lunches, so the boxes are 5 days of distance learning, so they get 5 days worth of meals. When Christmas vacation comes around and other holidays, as the box numbers go down, do we have anything worked out with any partners where they could pick up food?
Director Felder, again, we have had to shift our distribution for food service based on the requirements from the National School Lunch Program. We were fortunate enough to receive a waiver and had some expansion of what that could look like. But since we moved into the regular school year, we're essentially back to that model that we would have during our normal traditional in-school approach. So certainly as we get to those spaces where we have days off, consecutive days off over breaks, winter break or spring break, we would then try to utilize the same support model as we have in the past and work with those local agencies that might be able to provide additional meals or access for families.
Okay. It wasn't, again, I was just asking the question, like, have you already reached out to the park board? Just because I know that they've been on close real tight, you know, just to see if that's going to be an option so that we know when that's going to happen. Also, for our educators who feel, oh, I'm sorry, for the late requests for technology, are we going to be able to fill late requests for technology? Because I know a lot of people are going through things right now. And I know that we said that we covered the technology pieces that we had requests for already, but I'm pretty sure there's going to be late requests.
Yes, Director Felder. As mentioned, we have enlisted the support of our schools, and in talking with one teacher today, that's what they've been doing for the last several days, is making contacts with families to try and identify, what resources they need around technology devices and things as such. So that is happening. That has been happening in many cases. And as we get that information brought forward, we are identifying those needs. And as mentioned by Senior Officer Hennis, right now, based on the information we have, we are covered. Obviously, we know that we'll have a transition throughout the course of the school year. In the first couple of weeks of school, we know we have sometimes students entering Minneapolis public schools. So just trying to prioritize, setting aside what is needed for our students first and foremost, and obviously working closely with the monitoring of the vendors and the orders that we have to ensure that as soon as they get here, we can distribute those in a timely manner. So as we understand it right now, we're in as good a spot as any other district, and as good a spot as we can be. And we're just continuing to try and capture that information from schools and get it processed as soon as possible so that we can have devices and technology support in the hands of our students prior to the first day of school.
Right on. Are we going to be able to go one-to-one this year?
Director Felder, our plan is for universal access. We are not proposing a one-to-one model for the district, in large part because of some of our students and the idea that devices or technology may not be necessarily most appropriate for them. But our intent is to give students access to a device so that they can be supported in distance learning this school year. And then as we evaluate, the needs and our success with this practice, then we would probably make recommendations based on the feedback from that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Director Felder. Director Arneson?
Thank you. I just have one clarifying question, just in regards to scheduling and how we're teaching lessons. I know that we are teaching live more often and having a kind of a predictable schedule, which I think is great. And I know a lot of families want that. I just I'm wanting to clarify, will those lessons perhaps be recorded if for some reason a student missed the lesson or just wants to go back and maybe repeat the lesson? I think maybe some families may hear like that maybe they feel like they have a work commitment or something and they might not be able to be directly there with their child. And so I'm just wondering if you can just clarify if families can work it out with their teacher. I'm assuming. I just want to clarify, confirm that though.
Director Arneson, thanks for the question. I'll ask Senior Officer Fearing or Senior Officer Hennis maybe to clarify that. I think obviously our intent is to make it live and to provide as much real-time access to experiences through the distance learning model. I do know that we also have some capacity ability to record some of those, but I'll defer to Dr. Fearing and Senior Officer Hennis if you want to provide a little more clarification on that question.
Yes, Superintendent. Thank you for the question. We do have the capabilities with our technology platform to record the lessons, and we're providing guidance to our teachers on how to do so and make those available for later viewing.
Perfect, thanks. And it sounds like individual families can work things out with their teacher in individual circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Arneson. Director Walser?
Thank you, Chair Ellison, and thanks to everybody for this presentation. Oh my heavens, all the different parts of this that people have had to work on. I am really awed by the work that's gone into this, and so my congratulations and thanks to everybody. It's really a stunning piece of work. I have one I have two things on my mind. One is kind of a how the heck are we going to get a student count in October for our budget? That's a rhetorical question. I have no idea how it's going to happen, and I'm sure you're worrying about it too, but it's on my mind because I've that's a huge part of the formula for figuring out where the money to keep this whole ship afloat comes from. So I'm really curious about that, but I don't need an answer to that right now. The question that I'd like to raise has to do with distance learning, because distance learning works differently for families where the parents can work from home than it does for families where that's not possible. The challenges obviously include academics, but extend beyond that to the economic impact of families. Since many families, especially in Minneapolis, families of color, rely on school so that parents can go to work. And what I'm hearing from parents and teachers is that this is an issue of equity. And so my question is, how is MPS addressing the disproportionate economic and academic impacts of the pandemic?
So Director Walzer, thank you for the question. I think as we've alluded to, our attempt here is to find a balance of the health and safety needs of our students, the educational needs, both academically, emotionally, socially, mixed in with the complexity of our family needs in society, and the disparities that we have from as already alluded to, a financial income place, a health disparities, housing disparities, employment disparities. And so I would say that what you pose is really a question that I think for the benefit of the community is one that might be addressed at the board level. Because as you talk about this need for equity and in this tension that we have, I think it would be a healthy discussion to be very clear that if we're headed down the wrong path in what we're doing, that you offer governance and guidance with that. Because I think the attempt we've been making here is to weigh all of that and balance it based on our knowledge of education and our experiences that we've learned from families, staff, and the community at large through last year's distance learning kind of emergency response. So I appreciate the question and would offer that that's something I would love to hear more of your thoughts on to help inform our next steps.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director Walzer. Director Caprini?
Thank you, Chair Ellison. This really was a very full presentation. I appreciate all the work that's gone into it. So Director Arneson actually asked the question that I wanted to ask, but just one clarification and then I guess it's two clarifications. So the stable home, stable schools slide that we looked at, it was mentioned that there was an increase in the amount of money we were able to support families with unpaid rent and utilities. And I thought I heard her say it was close to 300,000. And then the other part to that was I heard something to the effect about looking for homes for families within the zone. Does that mean that we're actively looking throughout the whole city, or are we looking, or yes, are we looking throughout the whole city so that families have an opportunity to live, anywhere in Minneapolis? And then the last thing is maybe kind of quirky. The athletics. Did the Minnesota State High School League give any reasoning why they chose soccer and tennis? I see them both as contact sports in the sense that obviously soccer is far more contact sport than tennis, but the athletes would be using the same ball. So I actually had a conversation with a parent of an athlete, and they asked me that question, and I thought, I hadn't thought about students using the same tennis ball, but my response was, I guess if we're really clear about not touching your face, but I don't know. So I just wanted to know if MSHL gave any clarification as to why they chose those two sports to go through with their season. And I'm not opposed to it. Don't get me wrong. I'm excited that student athletes will actually be able to play. And then the very last thing is the climate framework curriculum transformation. I just wanted to make a comment that and it's my hope that that work really spreads itself out throughout the whole district, because we do have some schools that may not have, they may have a very low percentage of students of color, but again, you know, we're all aware of that there are all different kinds of students that attend our schools, and all different kinds of staff that work in our buildings. And I just see it as work that I really don't want to see folks kind of get one-sided about how the work has to be kind of sprawled out throughout the district, all across the city, because if we're not intentional about it in a school that has a low percentage of students of color, then I think we're doing a disservice to the students and families that are a part of that school community, as well as the staff that works in that building. So that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Caprini, for your questions. Your kind of three buckets there. I'll start with the climate framework and just provide a general response to that. It is a curriculum transformation. It is throughout the district. I'll also acknowledge your comment about it being intentional. That is exactly what is being attempted through the intersection of the climate framework with the curriculum transformation and the collaboration that's happening with the academic team, as well as supporting Senior Officer Moore and the rest of the group. So I think we're aligned in what you described as your hope for how that is moving forward. I will ask Charlotte Kinsley to speak to your question about the numbers and the zone for our homeless, highly mobile, stable home, stable schools supports in just a minute. And then noting the sports and the rationale for soccer and tennis. I did not get that information specifically from Mr. Tony Fisher, who's our key point of contact with MSHL. I don't know if Dr. Berry has it. I can certainly speculate as to why those two sports were identified as continuing for this spring, but I'll ask Charlotte Kinsley to respond, and then if we're able to get clarification on the outdoor activities of those two sports, we'll provide that as soon as Charlotte's finished. Thank you.
Great, thanks for the question, Director Caprini. Yes, the first part about expansion and spending 300,000. So that was correct. So in late May, we expanded and shifted and funneled more funds toward the eviction prevention part of the initiative and expanded it to all of the MPS elementary schools, just given what we were seeing with COVID and income loss and people falling behind on rent. So that's why the big increase from the last report that we saw. And then your question around looking in the zone. So stable home, stable schools is really designed to be for, in terms of the housing search, the rental assistance part is designed for families who want to stay in their same school and are homeless and living outside of their transportation zone and needing to find housing within their zone. So it's really a school stability and a housing stability program. So that's the intent of the program. When we're looking at the comprehensive district design, we're looking at the CDD zones for next year, and families are searching to stay in their same school using the CDD zone. So really the intent is for families who want to stay at their same school.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Other directors, if you have any questions, please use the raise hand feature. I had a couple of questions. Well, one question, one comment. I didn't see discipline addressed on this slide, and I just want to know if there will be any expectations or protocols around suspension or out of classroom use during distance learning.
Chair Ellison, thanks for the question. Obviously, we had some experiences last spring with distance learning and managing that. And so I think, based on what we implemented last spring, we learned that there were some needs of support, but I think everyone is still focused on trying to meet the students where they are. And so that we'll take the approach of ensuring that they're interacting with their their classmates, their peers in a way that is safe, respectful, responsible. And so I think that those types of approaches, as we witnessed last spring, would be continuing through this fall in our phased learning approach, or excuse me, a phase 2 distance learning approach. I don't know if that answers your question, but I would, I guess, offer if you have more specifics that maybe
No,
I
no,
can
no,
come
that
back to the
answered.
group on.
No, that
Okay.
answered my question. That's what I was looking for. So thank you. Director Felder, did you have another question? Okay, Director Jordan.
Oh, hello?
Yes, Director Felder, I saw your hand go down, so I was assuming you no longer had a question.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. You had called my name, so I took it down, but I didn't turn my microphone on.
Okay.
Sorry. Just about the zones piece. So I have a lot of students that are being dispersed to other parts of the city. Does that mean that when we help them find a home so that they can stay in their same school, that we were actually relocating them, let's say, across the river into Northeast Minneapolis, or how is that doing? Are we moving people out of North Minneapolis when we're supposed to be going back to a community model? Or I just want to know like how exactly that works.
Director Felder, I think if I may make some assumptions, I think you're talking about how are we going to support the stable home, stable schools model
Yes.
with transitions. Yeah, I think that those are things that are going to be evaluated. Obviously, as mentioned, when we have students who are homeless and highly mobile or potentially in an unstable homes or housing situation, we want to provide that stability and consistency as much as possible. But I can't speak to the specifics of the program and how that's set up with those transitions moving forward. I would say if Charlotte has a response to that now that you can provide, or if that's something we need to take a look at further and bring back for information to the board, I'll defer to you, Charlotte.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding the question. So you're asking with the CDD how we're looking at potential school moves, or are you just talking in general with where people are looking for housing?
With the CDD, so that you can help them stay in the same school.
Yes,
That
okay.
would be moving them out of my district into another district so that they can stay in their same school, correct?
So I guess that could potentially be correct. So essentially families are going to be supported in the transition at an individual family level. So we have kind of the list of families that will now potentially be housed outside their zone, which ends up being, I think there are 66 students who are in that kind of a situation. So we will be meeting with each family individually and talking about what their options are and making sure that they have choice within the options, either to remain in their same housing and look at a new school, or potentially look at a housing shift to stay in their same school. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, somewhat. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Jordan.
Hi, thank you, Chair Ellison. I just wanted to echo what Senior Officer DeVette said earlier about the food distribution and the staff that just did a tremendous job making sure students and families were well fed. And I know in our household, we picked them up occasionally through the summer. And I just wanted to say that we enjoyed watching Chef Rebecca do her weekly meal box preview. So thank you for all that and everyone that did work hard on that. Two quick clarifying questions. So for folks who still have their devices from their past spring, they do not need to be updated, or will they automatically update if they're in need of an update? And also too, one of the things that I have personally experienced as a parent trying to communicate with Lizzie and Max's teachers, specifically their spec ed staff, is that when responding to their emails with my personal email, they don't go through. And so, and I've tried a couple of different personal emails that I had to create, and they still don't get them. I don't know if that's a filtering problem, but and I know I'm not the only parent that has had that problem, where you have a Gmail account and you respond to a email from district staff, and they don't get them. And I've tested it with my own district email, and it's the same thing, where my personal email does not get through. And is there a way we can address that issue? Because like I said, I'm not the only parent that has experienced that. And finally, I just wanted to echo Director Felder's comments regarding a mental health support for our staff during this time. I think that's incredibly crucial, and I do appreciate the work that we're doing moving forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Jordan. I appreciate your comments about the support of staff for mental health. Also appreciate your acknowledgement of the culinary wellness team and what they provided for students over the summer for meals. I will ask Senior Officer Hennis to address your two questions about the devices and what students or families should do if they don't need updates, or do they have to have updates to what they already have, to give a little more clarification on that. And then also ask him to respond to the challenges with emails and those going through our system. So Senior Officer Hennis, are you available to respond to those?
Yes, Superintendent. Thank you, Director Jordan, for the questions. As far as the updates go, we're able to send those updates out to those devices over the internet. So the students just need to have those devices connected and they'll get all the updates that they need. As far as the email goes, during the COVID pandemic, there's been an uptick in the amount of cybercrime and people using free email services like Gmail or Yahoo to commit these cyber crimes. And some of that leads to some of our security products to kind of further lock down to protect the district. So we will be working with our vendors to make sure we can allow the communications that should be happening between our families and our teachers that are very important do get through. So we are working on that, and we hope to have that resolved while protecting the safety of our staff and students. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. And I know this was actually a problem before this past spring. Some of the teachers at Lizzie and Max's school would send out emails, and I was responding to them, and I would never get an answer. And so finally, I actually had to call Max's teacher, and we did an email test over the phone. This was last fall, and so I also had a Gmail account that still was just not responding. And like I said, I tested my own email, district email. So and this was going back to last fall. Even this summer, or even this past spring, with Max's IEP, with his spec ed work, it was still happening. So I think you're right. Obviously, I'm not trying to dispute that, but I think moving forward, I know it's an incredible heavy lift, but I believe that we are going to get it fixed. So thank you.
Chair Ellison?
Yes.
This is Ed. I was wondering if I could ask staff to respond to a couple of director questions that I didn't have answers to at the moment. I wanted to go back to Director Walzer's question or comment about student enrollment. I do think it'd be helpful to have Senior Officer Diop just kind of briefly address that. And then once he's finished with that, if I could have Associate Dr. Berry address the question from Director Caprini around the guidance that was given or provided maybe for the sports of soccer and tennis continuing.
Sure,
That's
absolutely.
okay.
That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. So Senior Officer Diop, would you please respond to the question about managing or how we're going to determine the enrollment numbers for the upcoming budget year?
Yes. Chair Ellison, Superintendent Graf, members of the board, and members of the community who are listening. Director Walzer, thank you for the question. And the state with the Minnesota Department of Education requires teachers to take positive attendance. They gave us actually a specific guidance for us to follow. Teachers will need to have some form of contact with their students to count as positive attendance. So we are, and actually yesterday in a meeting that I was with with a rating agency, they did say that this is a question that they see across the country as they go through their reading. So every district is going into these types of positive attendance. And so using the devices that students have, teachers are following certain these guidelines to then count what the positive attendance is. And that's what we would be using for our October 1st data. Thank you.
Thank you for that information. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Senior Officer Diop. Dr. Berry, would you mind addressing the question about fall athletics?
Thank you for the question, Director Caprini. I know the answer because Director Fisher is he texts fast, so I know the answer to the question. The Minnesota High School League identify the sports by tiers. So football is considered a tier 1, which is high risk in terms of contact and exposure. Soccer is a tier 2, and tennis is considered a tier 1, which is a tier 3, which is the lowest risk. So it's the way that they identify the sports in relation to contact and possible exposure.
Thank you, Doc. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's it.
So thank you very much for that, Dr. Berry. Just really quick, do you know if the athletes that are playing soccer would be allowed to wear a face shield, or because I know that there's guidelines with the uniforms and all of that. Is it possible to, and if you don't know the answer to that, you know what, you can tell me tomorrow or you can text me later, but I am curious.
I'm not sure of that answer, but so I can text you later.
And I'll be sure to make sure I post it on Minneapolis, my athletics page. Thank you. I appreciate you. I appreciate everyone.
Thank you. You gotta appreciate the text. I was happy to hear about the climate framework and the curriculum transformation alignment. And I know Director Caprini asked about it, but I was most happy to hear about the climate framework again, because after the superintendent's opening remarks, it kind of highlighted for me the importance of respect and equity, safety, and a welcoming sense of belonging. All issues that were addressed in our climate framework, which staff presented to us last week. And I want to thank Superintendent and his team again for that presentation. I think tonight's presentation just highlights how important our climate framework is in terms of in-school learning, distance learning, and just life in general. And so thank you. I don't see any other hands raised. So thank you, Superintendent Graf and your team and directors. Thanks for the questions. I really enjoyed tonight's presentation. I'm now going to adjourn our committee of the whole meeting. Our next meeting will be on September 8th. Have a great night, everybody. Thank you.